All right, it is the top of the hour, so we will go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's joint GIML and Active Navigation webinar, Building a Compliance Foundation for CCPA and Future Data Privacy Regulations. We appreciate you all being here. So before we get started, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. There we go. So first is, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them. We are going to answer those questions live after the presentation is concluded, along with any additional survey questions that will be made available to everyone. We are recording today's session, and everyone will have access to that recording. And also, if you have any technical difficulties, please send us a message and let us know so we can help you solve any issues that you might be having. Now I'd like to take a second and introduce today's speakers. From Active Navigation, we have the account executive, Patrick Cardelio. My name is Matthew Deeden, and I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at GIML. So with that, and with those introductions, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for that. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the, as Matt said, to the webinar. And, for today, I think there's a few key things that we're going to cover. Certainly, we're going to talk about what exactly the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, actually is, and perhaps more importantly, why it matters, right? What within that regulation is expected to affect a lot of people on this webinar today. So we're certainly going to cover that. And then we're going to really delve into what we think enterprises should be doing to help to achieve compliance, right? And that will, of course, involve not only the Active Navigation software, but also GIML, and so we'll sort of hand it off there. And then, as Matt said, we'll certainly do questions at the end, okay? And so I guess, to start off and really get it going, well, there's a lot of privacy bills in the market we know now. I think everybody's aware of GDPR in Europe. And, it's really quite interesting because when that law first came into law, a lot of people were questioning whether it would have teeth, right? And what exactly organizations would have to do in order to comply with it. Now, from that, from the GDPR, we then come across to the United States, and we see that the California Consumer Privacy Act comes into effect. And it actually comes into effect, as I'll mention in a second, in early 2020. But it doesn't end there, right? I think that there's an expectation, and at least there should be one throughout the market space, that these two regulations are just the beginning when it comes to data privacy. On this slide here, we're listing just some of quite a number of states that are pursuing this actively in little bits of different ways, each one, but all pursuing data privacy and really threatening to enforce them on an enterprise level. Certainly that involves sort of different aspects of it. So for example, in New York, I'm talking about sort of biometric data, whereas whereas the California law sort of has an umbrella type approach to identifying persons, or as they call it, consumers, and protecting their information from a base level. And so what exactly is the impacted area of the CCPA? Well, it's quite a few people, and it's quite a few companies throughout the United States and the world, frankly. So there are many residents, obviously, that are within California that are impacted by this, just about 40 million. And the law, which was signed into law on June 28th, 2018, will go into effect January 1st, 2020. And so organizations have to start preparing now. So really, what does this mean, and what does this do for the market space in general? Well, the goal of the law is to give consumers really more control of their information as it pertains to companies and agencies holding it, right? It's essentially in response to, of course, the GDPR being put into law, but also some of the things in our political realm that have been happening, such as the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica scandal, where they didn't really break the law by selling people's information, but they certainly perhaps breached some moral standards. And so what the CCPA attempts to do is say, well, hold on a second. That is no longer lawful unless somebody consents to it, right? And so you have the right as a consumer, both within California or perhaps as an employee of a company that exists within California, you have a right to know what information is being held on you, and you have a right to furthermore request that that information be deleted, right? Now, what organizations have to comply with this? Because truth be told, it doesn't apply to every single group and every single organization that might exist out there. Well, it is still quite a broad umbrella. If your company has a revenue of $25 million or more annually, you have to comply with CCPA. If you collect data on at least 50,000 people, right? That's both California residents and employees. That means that you have to comply as well. And so truth be told, we're actually talking about millions of people. And of course, the size of California dictates that this law is actually quite broad, and a lot of people are actually within scope. Now, there's a lot of consultants, there's a lot of companies, there's a lot of firms that are trying to anticipate how many companies will in fact be compliant by that January 1st, 2020 date. Truth be told, it's not looking very good. At this point in time, it seems about 55% of companies plan to be ready. 55% plan to be ready by January 1st, 2020. And, that's about in line with GDPR. And if you look at some further data, the companies that now are ready for GDPR have complied. A fraction of them have started to plan for CCPA. So this is still up and coming, or not even planned for most organizations in the space, which is a bit nerve-wracking. Not only because this is anticipated to be, as I said, only the first of many privacy regulations throughout the United States, but we also expect it to have teeth. We expect there to be significant fines associated with non-compliance. And so what exactly are the sections of this rather broad regulation that apply certainly to the unstructured data side, right, of companies in scope? Well, like I said, consumers, employees now have the right to know what information is being held on them. And so if your company, if your organization has employees or does business within California, you now have to be able to find private information pertinent to a specific person and be able to give them proof that you're holding their information, then furthermore be able to delete that information when they ask for that information to be deleted. So what are we really talking about? We're talking about the ability to search for data, the ability to classify data, and the ability to action, right? Whether that be deleting or quarantining. And certainly, of course, the right to opt out is key, in that if somebody does not want information from you moving forward, or does not want you to hold their information moving forward, with some exceptions, you have to comply with that. And so where's the biggest risk, right? Well, a lot of organizations are not ready and are not getting ready. And there's somewhat of a tragedy in that, because frankly, there's a lot of reasons to comply with CCPA already. Putting aside the fines and those penalties that are expected, there's already a huge risk of sensitive data exposure that's present already existing on the unstructured side of data, right? People's private information floating out, let's say a file share or SharePoint, things like that, things we find at Active Navigation at every single client site. So there's already incentives to get rid of this stuff, or at least to find it. CCPA just pushes, I think, that needle a little bit forward. So it's certainly a risk in non-compliance because you continue that risk moving forward. But furthermore, you have the the further danger of incurring significant costs that are associated with fines. So what exactly, how does this really pertain to the unstructured side of data? So this graph actually is something that we at Active Navigation have been using for a number of years. And really what it seeks to show, what it seeks to describe is any given client's, any given agency's unstructured information estate. Right, so this could be file shares, this could be SharePoint, OpenText, Exchange, O365, OneDrive, whatever any of these unstructured data systems are, these file sharing systems. We know that there's a lot of garbage within them, at least, as this graph shows, 30 to 40% of data that is rot, right? This could include things like temporary files and empty files and silly things like that, but it could also, and always does include, perhaps stale data, right? Things that used to be records for the sake of retention, but no longer are. They've fallen outside of your retention plan. But yet they're still floating within those dark shares, right? Nobody knows that they exist, but they're still taking up space. An equally bad part of it, perhaps most pertinent to CCPA, is also floating out there are things like password files and sensitive information, HR files, employee contracts that frankly should never have been within a file sharing system, but they are because users save things where it's easy. And so fundamentally what a file analysis platform like ours can do is identify this stuff and get rid of it, right? You can delete all of the garbage out, right? You can also identify duplication and get rid of it. Now, this has always been important for the sake of information governance, but how it ties into specifically CCPA is you can build that data inventory now, right? Instead of waiting, you can start to do it so that you can move closer to classification for the sake of regulatory compliance. And frankly, you're also bringing down the amount of information significantly so that it's more easy to perform search for finding people's private information pertinent to CCPA. And so, really that gets to, I think, the crux of this entire webinar and what I'm sort of preaching here, which is, organizations have to turn away from this reactive type approach to information governance. For example, lots of organizations historically have come to us because they are running out of storage and they don't want to pay for more storage space, or they've had a breach, right? They've had a data breach and they don't know either what information was stolen or what information was accessed, what sensitive stuff has now been stolen. And so they all waited for sort of that important moment to take action. Well, what CCPA does, and what all of these privacy regulations do, is hopefully, it should at least, change the market from a reactive type approach like that to a proactive approach. Okay, we have to know what data exists now and today. We have to build a data inventory now in preparation for CCPA, but also so that we have robust IG across the enterprise, and so that if and when we get breached, we're prepared, we're more prepared, because we know what data exists within our systems and we can protect it more precisely, right? And so that proactive approach involves a comprehensive solution. The solution overall certainly involves technology, and I will get into that in depth, because that's what we at Active Navigation really have to offer, is a technology platform that can identify the information, classify it, and action it, right? Delete, clean, quarantine, etc. But also equally as critical to any agency that is trying to comply with CCPA, you have to have the right people involved as well as the right process. And so who are those people? Well, it involves a mix of different people, such as records managers, IT professionals, compliance officers, because these are the people who not only understand the policy, such as taxonomies, such as retention schedules, but they also understand the data itself, roughly, right? Where is our biggest risk? How much data do we have, and what do we really have to get further insight on? But then also you need more people than that. You need liaisons to end business units so that you can really roll out this kind of project to different business units. You can translate the outputs to the different people within the organization. But then you also need senior management buy-in, right? You need a CIO, a CISO, something like that. You certainly need legal because they understand the regulation that's now pushing your organization towards IG. And so what is the process, though? Well, the process involves using technology effectively right across your entire agency. And those technologies vary, right? So this graph, this is actually based on a study developed by the Ponemon Institute. And really what it seeks to represent is traditionally, historically, where companies have invested their money with regard to information security, right? And so at the beginning of this graph, you see 3 to 6 days. That represents the first 3 to 6 days of a sensitive file's life cycle. So maybe, for example, a file that contains sensitive information or private information on an employee, like an HR document, a contract. In the first 3 to 6 days of that file existing within your unstructured data system, there's a lot of investment towards protecting it. This, of course, includes tools like access management tools and things like that, fundamentally monitoring who can access the information. Towards the end of that file's life cycle, we see another investment gap. Now, what does this represent? This largely represents investment in things like data loss prevention tools, right? Ensuring that sensitive files that are within your environment cannot leave your environment without the right permissions and the right access rights and the right protocol. And so that's also critical. But what these two spikes represent fundamentally are tools that monitor data in motion as it's being moved, right? It's leaving a folder, it's entering a folder, somebody is accessing and moving it, etc. But what about this big area in the middle, this blue section where historically agencies have not invested a whole lot of money? Well, this represents data at rest. And so what that means is, for example, files within a file share, they haven't been accessed in years. Nobody, including records management or IT, really knows the contents of those files. And so thereby they don't know the value or the risk, right? They don't understand what's really within those unstructured areas. And this is where the biggest danger is, not only from a sort of a breach response aspect, right? Because if you get breached, you don't know what's been stolen if you don't know what existed beforehand. But certainly now with CCPA, you don't know if you're compliant or not, or if you can comply or not, if the information within your unstructured data stores is unknown. And so that's where a platform like ours, fundamentally a file analysis platform, can help, right? Because what our Discovery Center tool does fundamentally is it analyzes the information in those unstructured areas, builds aggregated reports as to what exists, let's say not only by file type or file age or file owner, but also by content. How many files contain social security numbers? How many files contain a name and an address? And so using this platform, you can identify the information in these dark areas and then feed those outputs to, let's say, a data loss prevention tool. So now you can ensure that the sensitive stuff that needs to be retained can in fact be protected and can be kept without risk. So that's the technology, and those are the people. Let's get back to the process now. How do you ensure that technology is used effectively, not only for information governance, but for compliance with CCPA or any privacy regulation? Well, it involves prioritizing your business area and then rolling out the technology in a targeted fashion. And so this process here really represents what we do at every one of our client sites, regardless of the size of their organization, right? So the first thing you're going to do is perform data discovery. Using our Discovery Center platform, you can analyze all of your unstructured information using what we call a data skim. This essentially will be looking at the metadata of files in scope, so you can see not only how perhaps how old files are within different data silos and different business units. But you can also understand what file types exist within those areas and potentially how sensitive that data is. You're doing a default skim first, a data skim first, because you're just getting a lay of the land across your enterprise, what exists. So now you can prioritize different business units. You know, this share over here has a lot of information that hasn't been accessed in however many years. This share over here seems to have a lot of information that's entitled employment contract. And so from these initial insights, you can prioritize these areas for the next step in this process, which is cleaning. You're going to do deeper indexing this time to identify content, right? Text and key terms within every file in scope of this index. And you're going to do it on just one business unit. So that way you can identify some of these key fields. You can identify garbage, stuff that falls outside of your retention schedule. You can certainly find duplicative files and delete the duplicates to retain the records in a series. But finally, and most important, especially for CCPA, is finding sensitive information. As I said, this includes a bunch of different fields out of the box, such as social security numbers, addresses, but you can also look for specific names, specific addresses, specific terms that you know you're looking for, either just to classify the information or to perform a consumer information request for the sake of CCPA. And so once you've cleaned up the information, maybe you've deleted your garbage, you've brought down your overall data volume, and you've classified and quarantined your sensitive information, now you can model that data in line with a taxonomy, right? You can classify it, you can bucket the information, and then you can tag it with metadata that corresponds to that taxonomy. So now, not only is the information actually classified, but it's also searchable, right? And then finally, if you want to migrate the information to a new system, you can, but you can certainly govern it ongoing, and this is where GIML really it becomes invaluable, and Matt will get into that in a second. So what's the plan, right? You know now that CCPA is serious, that there's a lot of different aspects to it, and that it's only the beginning with regard to privacy regulations. You also know now that you need the right people, so you got to get your team together. You need the right technology. You got to use a file analysis platform in line with a records management platform. But you also have the right process in place, right? You understand that you're going to prioritize your different business units, you're going to clean, you're going to classify, and then you're going to go to your second priority area. So what's the specific plan, the rollout using all three of those aspects for the sake of the CCPA? Well, here's what we are doing at some client sites today. First, you're going to use the technology to build the data inventory. You're going to identify fundamentally what exists across your organization using those different tiers of data indexes that I described. You're then going to classify that information, right? So that way, in these reports, you can see, for example, these are some real reports drawn through our Discovery Center product. You're going to understand what buckets files fall into, whether it's potential rot, whether they can be pretty much automatically deleted with little review. So for example, temp files, empty files, copyrighted music, we find that in every client site. Things that don't need much review that you know have no business value whatsoever. You can also choose to quarantine files based on what you find. Maybe it's stale records, but you still want to review to see if they are indeed relevant to your organization still or not. But then also, you can organize the findings against sensitivity. So this chart down here, for example, shows in a data area how many files were found that contain credit card numbers, or passport numbers, or Canadian SIN numbers, or social security numbers, or driver's license numbers, or addresses, email addresses, etc. So now you have the reports, which really gives you insight into what exists, and thereby you've built your data inventory across your enterprise. What's next? Well, now you're going to clean it. And of course, this process is perhaps where people are most important, right? Because you need to have the right people involved to be able to say, okay, this data set is indeed all garbage, it can go. or hold on a second, this subset of files still need to be retained because of this piece of the retention schedule, this piece of our taxonomy essentially dictating that it's still important records to the organization. Or perhaps there's a legal hold on certain types of documents. Well, we can perform search against that, identify it, and then you know not to delete it, right? Regardless, you need to have the right people in place to make these decisions. And so you see here, for example, on this slide, here's another screenshot of our Discovery Center product. What we're seeing here is a file list of a bunch of different files drawn from a report. So this specifically, I believe, was a sensitive data report that was drawn. And you have the option then to bulk delete or bulk quarantine or bulk mark up those files as is necessary. You'll see here that you get a window like this, which essentially gives you an option to remove endless layers of empty folders left behind after a data deletion. You can put in that annotation for the sake of the audit trail, and you can click delete, which sets it into motion. Now this is important, right? Because as I said before, if you can bring down the data volume, you can perform not only search more easily in the future, you can also get rid of potentially sensitive information that you don't need to hold, that are not records. Not only saving you time and cost for CCPA in January, but also saving you time and cost for, let's say, a future litigious situation. Performing e-discovery would become far less costly and far less time consuming if you have less data to do it against. So once you've cleaned up the data, you've probably brought down your data volume by at least 40%. That's our sort of market average. What's next? Well, the data that remains needs to be classified. So that way, you don't have to go back in, let's say, 6 months and do this entire process all over again and clean up a bunch of stuff again. You can perform search against the information that remains, and when it falls outside of retention, you can know that, and you can go ahead and get rid of it, for example. And so classification involves a process that's very much involving not only records managers, but records policy, right? Retention schedules. So you can inventory the data as, let's say, private for the sake of CCPA. You can bucket it, right, to any classification that you want. Maybe it's under legal hold, great. You can put a classification on every file that is indeed subject to a legal hold as under legal hold. You can put that markup on each individual file, and you can quarantine that information, or you can move it to an end system that's going to govern that for you. And so finally, once you've classified that information, you've identified it, you've cleaned it, and you've classified it across your enterprise, probably terabytes to petabytes of data. Now you can maintain compliance, right, by managing it in a new system, or by continually monitoring that information, or by continually performing search. And the most, I think, specific aspect of this towards CCPA is being able to identify key terms within files. And so in the software, in the Discovery Center platform, really what it uses, right, to identify sensitive information, key content, key terms within files, are extraction rules. And so you'll see the screenshot at the bottom here. That's a regex pattern that is seeking to identify social security numbers. So you can use any of these out-of-the-box rules to identify sensitive information, but you can also create your own. You can create a new extraction rule to, let's say, find data pertinent to a specific person. So you could look for files that contain the name John Smith, and then all of the different iterations of that name. So John Smith, Jack Smith, John A. Smith, et cetera, et cetera. And using these really complex extraction rules, you can run an index, run a report, and find every file that is pertinent to that person, thereby complying with CCPA, right? Because you can fulfill these consumer information requests, and you can delete those files if that's the request. So in the end, you've used file analysis, you're happy, your senior management's happy, and you're not getting fined, right? What's the real results of this? Not only have you deleted all of your garbage, because you've leveraged CCPA for the sake of information governance, but you've gotten rid of risk that you need not incur. You've gotten rid of sensitive stuff that should have never existed, but now CCPA helped you ensure that you could get rid of it. You've certainly reduced costs that are associated with both storage, but also more importantly, with e-discovery and with CCPA fines. You've helped to minimalize your data, right? This is a key piece of CCPA, is essentially saying that data that you do not need to hold on people, you should not have. You should minimize the information, the private information that you have on people, and only retain what's absolutely necessary. Well, you've achieved that through identification. You understand how much you have and you've minimalized it. You've also facilitated information governance, because by doing all of this, you can then feed all of these outputs and all of these records into a system for ongoing and comprehensive records management. So with that, Matt, I'm going to pass it off back to you, and you can talk about where you go from here.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Patrick. So I'm going to switch gears here and talk about what happens after you have identified, cleaned, and classified your information. How do you ensure that you don't fall into the same situation you just got out of while continuing to expand your business and generate even more information than you had before, not only as it pertains to CCPA and how you become compliant, but ensuring that you stay compliant. So this is kind of where Gimel comes in. Gimel is a records management software company. We were founded in 2002, for those that are not familiar, and we provide a comprehensive records management platform. Okay, this is a web-based platform that works with all major web browsers, including Internet Explorer, Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome. And what it is going to do is manage all of your information in place by integrating with all of your content repositories, whether that be SharePoint, Office 365, Box, file shares, just as some examples I have there. Also, if you have any content repositories that live outside of this graphic, we can always build custom connectors to fit your business needs. So it's a true federated records management platform. And what I mean by manage in place is that you don't need to migrate anything to a centralized records repository. You don't need to play with or migrate anything upon disposition. It's going to take care of all of that where the information lives in its natural content repository. So you don't have to do any change management processes, any costly platform, getting rid of content platforms or bringing in new content platforms. We are going to leave your business as is. We are just going to manage it as is. So what it's going to do, you now have the classified content. ActiveNav has helped you set up your classification rules. You have now put information where you want it to be put. You now have gotten rid of information you no longer want. So what this is going to do, it is automatically going to apply your new file plan to either the classified content or the location where the content lives. So it is automatically going to apply that file plan now, or retention schedule, right? And then at the end of the retention, if at the end of retention you have it that you want information to be deleted, it is going to automatically delete that information where it lives, right? You're going to hear me say automatic a lot, because we feel that the more you make things automated and take it out of the responsibility of the end user, the more accurate and the more consistent you are going to be. So we like to make things as automated as possible. We like to make things as accurate as possible. So I'm going to go forward a little bit here. Now, I said single retention and I said disposition. Obviously, that's a very summarized and granular file plan you have there, but we can also go much, much more complex. We can do multi-phase life cycles, we can do different triggers, we can do different actions at the end of that retention. Really, it's up to you. We are going to help you set up those file plans that you need upon implementing the platform. So go forward for me, Patrick. There we go. So right, remove the burden of migrating content to a records repository or having to change business processes to fit your compliance needs. So we're going to integrate with all those repositories. We are going to apply policies, retention schedules, even legal holds, right? So if your retention schedule is coming up to be is reaching its conclusion date, we can apply a legal hold if necessary, or things that aren't under retention, we can apply a legal hold to. This kind of goes into the security aspect or the permissions aspect of things as it pertains to the CCPA. We can change the permissions, who can access or modify a document as well. So go forward for me one more. Something that I want to touch on is that this is not just electronic records management or information management. This is electronic and physical. So our system can not only manage electronic within a single dashboard, it can also manage all of your physical information. The CCPA doesn't necessarily differ whether the consumer information is electronic or if the consumer information is physical. Both of them need to be managed accordingly. Our system can handle both. So you can get a unified view of your physical and electronic information. You can track, manage, and monitor all of your physical media. I say media because it really can be anything, whether if you want it to be at the box level, at the pallet level, at the tapes level. We can do microfiche as well. Really, any physical media, we can make sure we track, monitor, and manage. And obviously, we can check in charge-ins and charge-outs. We can also flag for disposition. So this is very, very, very robust functionality for your physical information. Now you have a unified policy, so your physical information can be under the same file plan as your electronic information. There's no need for an antiquated physical system over here and then an electronic system over here, and you guys are making similar file plans, but just paying twice to do it. You don't need to do that anymore. So go forward for me one more. And this is a big thing that I really wanted to touch on. We do provide enterprise search functionality with GIML records management. So what it is going to do, it is going to collect information from all of your content repositories in a central index. So this is very, very strong as it pertains to what Patrick mentioned earlier around the consumer data findability. Consumers can now request to see the information or personal information that you have. You need to be able to find that information in a reasonable amount of time and provide that information. Well, if you have multiple content repositories and multiple people managing each repository, generally that is going to be a very long and hard process. And generally, at times, you are going to be inaccurate. Right? You might not get everything that has their sensitive information. You might forget where some things are located or simply won't be able to find something. What this is going to do, it's going to connect all of your content repositories and make them all searchable with full search, full text search based on metadata, also electronic and physical records, and you can also customize your search results, right? So now you can find your consumer information upon request. Also, upon request, it makes it easier to delete personal information. That was another big thing about the CCPA, is the ability to delete upon request. You need to make sure, one, you can find it. You need to make sure, two, that you can delete it upon a consumer's request. And this really does help solve that issue and that pain as it pertains to those two things. So that's the GIML records management platform. That is what we can implement after active navigation came in and cleaned up your environment, got your classifications correct and in place. We are going to come in, install that platform, have it integrate with your content repositories, and manage all of not only your current information, but all your net new information going forward. So Patrick, I'll hand it over back to you for the key takeaway slide here.
Sure. Thanks for that, Matt. And like as you said, I think there's a great approach here in that you can leverage different technologies for different pieces of this story. And really, the biggest key takeaway from this is that really organizations should start now, because there should be an anticipation that not only will the CCPA have teeth, that they will issue fines starting most likely in July of 2020, but that it's only the beginning, that there's going to be more states doing this. And so you gotta have a process in place that involves using file analysis to identify your sensitive stuff, your private stuff, identify your garbage and identify all of that, get rid of your garbage, get rid of your rot, classify your sensitive data, and then be able to use a platform like Gimmel's to to really manage that stuff ongoing. And if you don't have these technologies in place, when you're dealing with large sums of data, you're not going to be able to perform these searches or to really govern ongoing for the sake of any of these privacy regulations. So you got to get going now. I think that's the big takeaway.
I 100% agree. Now, if anyone has any questions, like we said earlier, please submit them, because we're now going to jump into the Q&A portion. And it looks like we do already have some questions here for you, Patrick. So I'm going to go ahead and read those in the order they were received. The first question I have here is, can CCPA apply to me if I'm not a consumer-facing business or B2C business?
Yes, actually, 100%. So the key here, and to be honest, there's a lot of falsehoods that I think are floating out there. So first of all, the term consumer is a bit misleading in the CCPA. It refers to residents within California. Fundamentally. And so if your company, no matter what the product is that is being sold, if your company functions within California, right, well, then you have employees within California, and you have to comply with CCPA because you have private information on them. So yes, like the short answer is yes. People who live in California who are working for your company make your company liable for that regulation. So 100% yes.
Okay. Next question is, if I don't comply, is it just a slap on the wrist, or is there something a little bit more extensive?
It's going to be expensive. A company found in violation of the CCPA could face a civil penalty of up to $2,500 per violation, right? So and a violation could very well mean per record, right, that is non-compliant, for example. And then any person or company that intentionally violates the CCPA could face a civil penalty of up to $7,500 per violation. So we're definitely talking very serious fines here. And I think that that's a big difference between the CCPA and the GDPR. The GDPR, it's somewhat still, I think, a bit of a question mark, what the teeth on that one is going to be. But California, I think, frankly, partly because of the whole Facebook scandal, I think that they intend to prove that they're serious. And so people should expect these violations come July 2020.
That's a good thought.
Yeah.
Next question I have is, what information do I need to give people access to?
So that's a good question. So in terms of private information, right? In terms of people's private information, you have to be able to draw any sensitive fields that identify a person, and that umbrella is very broad. With the CCPA, it certainly includes your standard stuff like social security numbers and addresses, but it includes broadly anything that can be used to uniquely identify you as a person. So files containing biometric data, files containing even aspects of your person, such as hair color, eye color, weight, height. So it's extremely broad, and you have to be prepared to find and classify this stuff accordingly. So you have to draw anything that can identify a person, period, for the sake of consumer information requests. So it's very broad.
Okay. Next, I just want to touch on this real quick. Every attendee should have seen a survey pop up on their screen. If everyone would take a quick 5 minutes, or I'm sorry, not 5 minutes, 5 seconds, and just go through and answer those questions, I think it'll be really cool to gauge what our attendees are seeing in terms of how many people are responsible for records management, which below technologies do you use, and do you plan on improving your information management process? I think it'll be good to get a sort of a consensus on these areas for all the attendees. So if you don't mind just going through and just answering those questions, I think it'll be really valuable information for everyone, and we can talk about the results after this. Next question is, what search engine is used by Gimel's records management tool? I believe we have the ability to do a couple, ones like Elasticsearch, also Azure Search. To get a little bit more technical, we can definitely have a conversation on that post this call. We can go into the different tools that we can work with you on. Let me open up Q&A here. Apologize, I was looking at the question in the chat window. What approach do Gimel clients use to label physical media? Sticker with record ID, barcode, or something else? Either or. We do house barcodes in the actual software itself, so you can track it that way. Next question is, how does CCPA affect personal files that are required to be retained for a specific amount of time? We are in the staffing world, and the bulk of our records fall in this bucket. We never sell personal data.
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. And so the focus of the law is not so much on the transaction of personal information. It's on holding it, right? And so even if you are required to have personal data on people, such as staff, which of course is critical, you can retain that, that's fine, but the key is you have to be able to report on exactly what you have within within your environment pertaining to people. And furthermore, if those people leave your organization, they have the right not only to know what exists that is personal to them, but they have the right to request a deletion after your own retention policy expires. So you still have to be able to perform search regardless of whether you're selling that data or not.
Great. Next question we have is, how do you prove that you did remove someone's private info? Are there reports you can run? Yes, there are reports in the Gimel platform that you can run. You can also, as long as it's classified information, or even unclassified information. So let's say you're using the enterprise search functionality. If you get that request for that personal information, search for it, use that tool, find everything that pertains to that one single individual across the enterprise, and just go through and delete that information. The way you can prove that is by running a report or by going back to that search functionality and just making sure that nothing pops up.
Yeah, Matt, to jump on that one as well, because let's say that you're performing a deletion in the earlier part of the process as well, using a file analysis platform like ours. Essentially, there's a full audit trail of what information has been deleted, and then essentially all of the key aspects of those files that have been deleted are in that audit trail, and so you can, in a sense, provide a receipt under a consumer information request that way. Yep.
Good. Yeah, great thing to touch on. Similar to Gimel, we do provide destruction certificates upon disposition of any asset.
There you go.
Okay, I believe that is all the questions we have received. So I think we will go ahead and conclude today's webinar. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar. Patrick, thank you very much again for joining us on this. If anyone has any more questions to either Gimel or Active Navigation, you can reach out to Gimel directly, come to our website, or go to info@gimel.com, or reach out to Active Navigation directly at sales@activenavigation.com. Once again, we will send this recording to everyone within 24 to 48 hours. We hope you join us again for our next webinar. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, everyone.